Tonight, a fourth person dies in Victoria's worst drowning tragedy in 2 decades. Also tonight, tropical cyclone Kirrily picks up speed and intensity as it heads towards the North Queensland coast. Australia facing a shortage of critical ADHD drug. And scientists turn to IVF to try to save the northern white rhino from extinction. Good evening, Tamara Oudyn with ABC News. A tight-knit island community, first responders and the loved ones of victims are reeling tonight after 4 people died in the state's worst drowning disaster since 2005. An enormous rescue effort couldn't save the extended family group who got caught in a suspected rip at an unpatrolled Phillip Island beach yesterday afternoon.
It's a picturesque stretch of coastline, now the scene of a horrible tragedy that's claimed 4 lives and shocked the local community.
It's very sad and unfortunately it just does happen. These beautiful beaches, people just don't know the power of the ocean.
It's been almost 20 years since we've seen a single event that's resulted in such a high number of loss of life in Victorian waters.
The group, an extended family from Melbourne southeast, were visiting Phillip Island yesterday. 4 people waded into the water at Forest Caves Beach before getting swept into a rip. The alarm was raised and a flurry of emergency service vehicles joined off-duty lifeguards surfing nearby in the desperate attempt to save them.
Our crews worked amazingly hard to provide every opportunity to those 4 people.
A 23-year-old man, a 20-year-old woman and a 43-year-old woman visiting from overseas all died at the scene. A second 20-year-old woman was flown to hospital where she later died.
This tragedy has taken the lives of 4 people and it's fair to say that the impact will be profound on those families.
Police spent the day formally identifying the victims, which are believed to be part of the Indian community. The Indian High Commission has labelled it a heartbreaking tragedy and expressed its deepest condolences to the victims' families. The unpatrolled beach on Phillip Island's south coast is popular with surfers, but that attraction also makes it dangerous.
Tragically, as we found out yesterday and all too often, it is full of rips and hidden dangers.
Only a very, very experienced swimmer should be entering the water to swim in those areas.
Authorities will look at whether there are sufficient warnings in place.
In terms of what further actions need to be taken at that location, I really should wait for that investigation to be concluded.
Lifesaving Victoria is urging people to stick to patrolled beaches and swim between the flags.
As we approach this long weekend, everyone needs to work together to make sure that everyone comes home from the beach at the end of the day.
Police will prepare a report for the coroner. Jessie Thompson, ABC News.
Anthony Albanese has abandoned key elements of big tax cuts his government's repeatedly supported since it came to power, instead redirecting them towards millions of workers on low and middle incomes. The Prime Minister's acknowledged the backflip will be controversial, but insists Australians need financial help and that he has the ticker to do what's right for them. It's already triggered a furious backlash from the opposition leader, who's accused Mr Albanese of inflicting an unforgivable lie on voters. Matthew Doran reports from Canberra.
In a hurry to begin the public sales pitch, you guys get out of the way after upending a 5-year-old tax plan he'd inherited and had committed to keeping, just 5 months before it was due to come into force.
When economic circumstances change, the right thing to do is to change economic policy.
We're seeing a political charlatan who's prepared to do or say anything.
The original cuts passed back in 2019 would have left the tax system looking like this from the 1st of July this year. The main change was the removal of an entire tax bracket, meaning everyone earning between $45,000 and $200,000 a year would pay the same rate of tax. Labor's proposal shoves that extra tax bracket back in and it tinkers with the rates and thresholds around it. The lowest rate of tax is cut from 19% to 16%. The second tax rate sits at 30%. The 37% tax rate is the one that's reappeared, but it kicks in at a higher income level than before, of $135,000 a year, and the top tax rate from $190,000 a year. But how that translates to your bank account is the key here. Before, low-income earners weren't going to see anything from the Coalition's Stage 3 tax cuts. Under Labor's proposal, they'll get an extra $800. $100. More cash will continue through those middle income ranges up until $150,000 a year when the tide turns. The tax cuts are still there, they're just not as large for higher income earners as they otherwise would have been.
It's great for the lower income people because obviously you get more back, but at the same time, the higher income, I mean, they worked for their money, so why should they be penalised?
To use arguments like, oh, things have changed, is spurious.
Peter Dutton not commenting today on whether he'd repeal the plan if he became Prime Minister, rather wanting to focus on matters of character and credibility for the current PM.
Look at what he says and contrast that with what he actually does, because he's not a truthful person.
I'll tell you what my integrity is. Not looking at low and middle income earners and saying, sorry, I'm just the Prime Minister, I'm not in a position to help you.
The policy pivot will be put to its first electoral test in just over a month, when voters in the outer Melbourne seat of Dunkley go to the polls in a by-election.
I think it's good as long as inflation doesn't go up.
That's great for me and for my family.
But on whether it's a broken promise...
More like a reality check.
The government always changes their mind all the time. I don't really trust what they say regardless, sorry.
The Prime Minister citing Treasury analysis to insist that giving more people more money won't drive inflation even higher.
See you later.
And he's not done yet, promising more cost of living relief in the May budget, while setting the consumer watchdog on the nation's supermarkets to investigate whether customers are being gouged at the checkout. Matthew Doran, ABC News, Canberra.
A signature policy of the Victorian Labor government is being challenged in the Supreme Court, with public housing residents looking to halt a project that would see their homes demolished. In a class action lawsuit, residents from Melbourne's public housing towers claim their human rights are being breached by the government's plan to knock down 44 sites across the city over the next 3 decades. The government is looking to replace the towers with new buildings that will include a mix of public and private dwellings. The state says the existing towers are old and the redevelopment will help tackle the shortage of homes. But lawyers representing residents from the first 3 towers earmarked for demolition say their clients are in the dark about their futures.
So what we're seeking is that the government should put a pause on their planning, make decisions in accordance with the human rights of those up to 1,000 residents that are being impacted, and to commit to investing in public housing.
North Queenslanders are taking shelter tonight as they brace for the full impact of severe tropical cyclone Kirrily. The latest forecast has the Category 3 system making landfall just north of Townsville within hours. But the damage is expected to be more widespread as gale force winds batter coastal communities from Innisfail to Mackay.
A raging sea off the North Queensland coast. It's a treacherous playground for adventure seekers, the early symptoms of a looming cyclone.
We can come out about 7:30 this morning for a quick kite, get in well before it gets too windy.
Kirrily is on a rampage at her core 165 km/h gusts. Hamilton Islands copped 115 an hour winds, and heavy rain brought early flooding in downtown Bowen.
We could see isolated totals of up to 300 millimetres in a 24-hour period as this system crosses the coast.
Elders have been flown off Palm Island, which doesn't have an evacuation centre.
We're the largest discrete Indigenous community with a large population, and we do need one.
The system is due to hit Townsville and surrounds late tonight.
We've distributed more than 20,000 sandbags at the moment.
This afternoon, residents were ordered to seek shelter and lock down.
We're prepared and ready for the worst. Now we wait and hope for the best.
Along the coast, communities spent the day counting down and getting ready. Townsville's most vulnerable have also taken shelter in evacuation centres. It's the barest of basics. Residents and visitors on Magnetic Island, just off the coast of Townsville, have been cut off from the mainland. They've been urged to have enough boiled drinking water to last them 3 days in case of power failures. Across the region, more than 100 schools are closed. In air, locals spent the day preparing, and teams of volunteers have been busy filling sandbags.
It's been outstanding actually for the last 4 or 5 days. You can see by the
people here. This has just been non-stop for that whole time.
Some residents have boarded up their homes, just like they've done in previous cyclones.
Oh, I've been set up from the last few, and all we do is put the timber back over windows so we don't break the windows.
Extra police and emergency crews have been deployed. Interstate help is also on its way. A sleepless night ahead. Lily Nothling, ABC News, Townsville.
The only pharmaceutical company in Australia which supplies a critical ADHD drug will not be allowed to ramp up production even though there's a serious global shortage. US drug officials who control the key ingredient behind Vyvanse have refused to raise manufacturing limits despite pleas from Australian psychiatrists who say patients are suffering.
Bowling has never been a problem for Mark McCudden, but fielding has always come with some challenges.
I'll be completely off with the fairies. You know, thinking about anything.
The 42-year-old is one of more than 400,000 people who take medication for ADHD. It's changed the way he plays cricket and the direction of his life. After years of bouncing between schools and professions, he's now the financial controller for a major radiology company.
There's no way on earth, without the medication, I would have achieved what I've achieved in this role.
But since last August, Vyvanse, the second most common ADHD medication in Australia, has been in global shortage. The Therapeutic Goods Administration is now advising that 4 different strengths of the medication are in short supply and says things should get better between March and April. But the prospect of that not happening has prompted several Australian groups to write to the US Drug Enforcement Administration and plead for production limits to be eased. ADHD medication like Vyvanse contains a controlled substance called lisdexamphetamine, which is made in the US and is tightly controlled by the DEA because of its potential for abuse.
They need to understand the effect that it's having on people in Australia and New Zealand, and we're certainly very willing to work with them.
But the ABC can reveal that in January this year, the DEA quietly published a notice knocking back pleas to raise lisdexamphetamine production limits and therefore the amount of Vyvanse in the market, because it says current quotas will be sufficient to meet demand both in Australia and abroad. The refusal also comes after Takeda Pharmaceuticals, which is the only company bringing Vyvanse into Australia, revealed it used up its allotted share of lisdexamphetamine in the last 2 years. For Mark McCudden, the thought of going back to a life punctuated by chaos and distraction fills him with angst.
To find a solution for someone with a disability and then take it away from them is, when you say it so clearly like that, it's cruel.
A plea for kindness. Danny Tran, ABC News, Melbourne.
2 Melbourne statues have been vandalised on the eve of Australia Day. In St Kilda, a statue of Captain Cook has been sawn off at the ankles. Police say the vandalism was reported by members of the public in the early hours of this morning. Closer to the CBD, a monument in Queen Victoria Gardens was splashed in red paint. Workers were on site today cleaning it. Police say both acts of vandalism are being investigated. All eyes are on Canberra this evening for the presentation of the Australian of the Year Awards. Reporter Evelyn Manfield is outside the event and joins us now. Evelyn, tell us about some of the people being honoured tonight.
Well, there's 4 categories. You've got the local hero, you've got the young and senior Australians of the year, and then the big award, the Australian of the Year. So the finalists from each of the states and territories are inside now, but they did make their way down the red carpet here in Canberra a little earlier. Now, the finalist for the big award from Victoria is Janine Mohammed, and really she is a pioneer for Indigenous healthcare. She's dedicated to fighting racism and improving the health outcomes of Indigenous Australians, particularly in Victoria. Now, from 7:30 Eastern, we'll progressively begin to find out the winners of each of these categories, and then really their names and the causes that they've dedicated much of their lives to will then be put into the national spotlight. And they have excellent company that they're joining. Last year's winner, of course, Taryn Brumfitt. Before that, names like Grace Tame and Dylan Alcott.
Evelyn Manfield in Canberra, thank you. Hundreds of people gathered in the Gippsland town of Morwell today for the funeral of a young Melbourne doctor who was allegedly murdered 2 weeks ago. Ash Gordon has been remembered in his hometown as a hard-working doctor who always put his patients first.
Outside a country town hall, mourners give their thanks to Dr. Ash Gordon. Earlier this month, the 33-year-old was found fatally stabbed less than a kilometre from his Melbourne home. 2 teenagers have been charged with murder. Today, the focus for 700 funeral attendees in Morwell was remembering the young GP.
You couldn't help but be happy when you were around him. I'm sure I'll never get over the loss of my little brother. He was a huge part of our lives.
Older sister Natalie delivered a eulogy with an injection of humour.
This isn't goodbye, little brother. I'll see you again one day. And when I do, I can't wait for you to tell me how bad my wrinkles are.
His other sister, Tammy, recalled their treasured last moment together at Christmas.
He gave me one of those big Ash hugs where he just wraps his arms around you.
Dr. Gordon was remembered as a highly respected doctor who was really just a goofy larrikin at heart.
No one saw us running around the lounge room like ninjas after watching hours of anime, or wearing toilet rugs around our shoulders.
The funeral was soundtracked by some of his favourite contemporary classics, coming to a close with lyrics loved ones were all thinking. Following the funeral, Dr. Gordon was buried at nearby Yallourn and loved ones held a wake in his memory. It's clear they will grapple with his death for quite some time. In Morwell, Georgia Lenton-Williams, ABC News.
Russia has accused Ukraine of killing 65 of its own prisoners of war by deliberately shooting down a Russian military plane. Moscow says the captured soldiers were being flown to an exchange when the plane crashed in the southern Belgorod region near Ukraine. Kyiv says it hadn't been told to secure safe airspace.
A giant fireball near the Russian city of Belgorod. Good God, this woman says. Footage posted on social media showed a plane falling from the sky.
We saw a red fiery object, then we heard an explosion and saw a red flash, and that was it.
We all ran outside in case there was any help needed. It crashed far away, but it was still loud and scary.
The remnants of a Russian military transport plane could be seen scattered across fields near the Ukrainian border. Moscow immediately accused Ukraine of shooting it down with missiles in a terrorist act and said it had been carrying 65 Ukrainian prisoners of war on their way to an exchange.
Instead of this exchange taking place, the Ukrainian side launched an anti-aircraft missile attack on this plane, which became fatal.
3 Russian officers and 6 crew members were also said to be on board. Ukraine did not confirm or deny involvement. Military intelligence said a swap had been due to take place, but that Kyiv was not told to secure its airspace for the transfer.
It's evident the Russians are playing with the lives of Ukrainian prisoners, with the feelings of their families. It's necessary to establish all clear facts, considering the plane crashed on Russian territory.
The Ukrainians are claiming one thing, the Russians are claiming another, and we just don't know enough to comment on it.
In a church near the crash site, a vigil for the Russian servicemen on board. It's unlikely Russia will allow an independent investigation, so the true circumstances of the incident may never be known. Elias Kluwer, ABC News.
Northern white rhinos were once found across Africa. Now they're on the cusp of extinction, almost wiped out by illegal poaching. But there is hope for the future after scientists performed the first successful embryo transfer in its closely related southern species.
Najin and Fatu. This mother and daughter are the only 2 northern white rhinos left in the world. They live closely guarded on a reserve in Kenya. Now a fertility breakthrough may offer a way to save the species. Using a procedure on a closely related subspecies, scientists have successfully transferred the embryo of a southern white rhino into a surrogate mother.
It is really a great milestone to achieve the first successful embryo transfer in the rhino. It's very challenging in terms of placing an embryo inside of the reproductive tract, which is almost 2 meters inside of the animal.
The next step is to replicate this and produce northern white rhino calves. The last male died in 2018, but 30 precious embryos are being stored in a lab in Germany. Najin and Fatu aren't capable of carrying a calf to term, so the embryos will be implanted into a southern white rhino surrogate.
But with this new technology, we see that we have a really fair chance to achieve this, the first pregnancy of this magnificent species in this year.
It's a race against time to make the impossible possible before these northern rhinos are gone forever. Joni Jones, ABC News.
Finance now in the local share market produced its 5th rise in a row today. Here's Alan Kohler.
The reason the share market went up again today was that the People's Bank of China cut interest rates, which boosted the iron ore price, and that led to solid gains in the share prices of Australia's listed iron ore miners, BHP, Rio Tinto and Fortescue. But there was one nasty prang. Domino's Pizza was sliced 30% after a trading update that said December half earnings would be less than last year because of falling sales in parts of Asia and Europe, especially Japan. Now, the strength of the iron ore price after that Chinese rate cut is in the context of rising commodity prices generally, caused by attacks on the shipping in the Red Sea. Iron ore is actually the commodity least affected by this, although more than 10% of the steel trade is being disrupted. But the biggest impact is on fertiliser. The US market also had its 5th rise in a row last night, and share prices in Shanghai and Hong Kong responded to the rate cut with solid gains, and the Aussie dollar was steady against all major currencies. Finally, here's a chart that explains the change to the Stage 3 tax cuts. Now, the vertical axis is percentage of income. Horizontal axis is salary, ranging up to $200,000. Now, the blue line shows how the tax cuts were going to be distributed before today's changes. The more you earned, the more you got. The orange line shows the new distribution. Now, for those on salaries above $60,000 a year, it's basically the same for all. And those earning less than $45,000 now get a tax cut where they wouldn't have before. And that's finance.
The women's singles finalists in the Australian Open will be decided tonight, with the semi-finals just about to get underway. The defending champion Aryna Sabalenka is first up against number 4 seed Coco Gauff. Tom Maddox is at Melbourne Park and joins us. Tom, how's this one expected to go?
Hi Tam, this promises to be a bit of a blockbuster featuring 2 of the most impressive players on the women's side of the draw this tournament. The last time they met was last year's US Open, when a teenage Gauff beat Sabalenka in 3 sets to break through for her maiden Grand Slam title. So I'm sure Sabalenka will be out for some measure of revenge, but it's a hard one to pick, Tam. Both women have been in such dominant form on the tour of late, and the winner would possibly pave a way to becoming number 1 in the world. And then following that match on Rod Laver Arena, quite a contrasting matchup. We have a qualifier from Ukraine in Diana Yastremska up against China's top-ranked female player in Qinwen Zheng. It's a bit of an unknown for both players. They've never played each other, and this is both their first appearance at this stage of a Grand Slam. It would be quite the story, Tam, if Yastremska wins. She'd become just the 2nd player ever to reach a Grand Slam single as a qualifier. Of course, the men's semis, they've been set, Tam. Alexander Zverev, the German 6th seed, last night upset the young Spanish star Carlos Alcaraz in 4 sets. Zverev says he's happy to be playing top-level tennis again after recovering from quite a nasty injury a couple of years ago. But his result, it sets up a semi-final clash tomorrow with Daniil Medvedev.
Alexander Zverev had never beaten a top 5 player at a Grand Slam.
Oh, he's done it.
But his victory over world number 2 Carlos Alcaraz is one of his finest performances, and comes 18 months after a painful ankle injury.
I was kind of on top of my game before the injury happened. You know, I'm obviously extremely happy to be back where I am and winning these kind of matches.
Zverev was aggressive from the outset.
And he needs the one. Wonderful display from the German.
He bludgeoned his way through the first 2 sets and was a break-up in the 3rd before the Spaniard roared back.
You just never know.
And despite some bandaged toes, the German recovered to put the Spanish star away in 4 sets.
I'm sad with my level today because I've been playing good tennis, you know, the round before, this one with a lot of confidence.
Zverev's tournament has been overshadowed by allegations of domestic violence against a former girlfriend, claims he denies. The case is set for trial in Germany this year. Scrutiny will only grow if Zverev reaches the final. His next opponent is Daniil Medvedev.
He's obviously extremely difficult to play, there's no question about it.
An Australian is through to the men's doubles final. Matt Ebden and partner Rowan Bapana celebrated like the Special Ks after winning their semi-final in 3 sets. At 43, Bapana recently became the oldest player to reach #1 in doubles.
I think this grey hair didn't come pretty easy, you know.
But an Australian won't feature in the women's doubles final after Storm Hunter and Katerina Siniakova lost in 3 sets. Tom Maddox, ABC News, Melbourne Park.
A late afternoon fight back from the West Indies has frustrated Australia after its bowlers delivered a dominant opening session on day 1 of the second test in Brisbane. Mitchell Starc did the damage with the ball, taking his 350th test wicket before the tourists' lower order dug in.
The West Indies won the toss and elected to bat, naming a 4th debutant for the series in the process, off-spinner Kevin Sinclair the only change from the first test for either side. There was early excitement when Josh Hazlewood thought he had Craig Braithwaite LBW, but an instantaneous review showed a huge inside edge.
Not a great start for the umpiring side of things.
But after facing 17 consecutive dot balls, Braithwaite wafted at one too many outside off stump.
Hazlewood is relentless.
The paceman quick to shoo away COVID-positive all-rounder Cameron Green, who was left to celebrate by himself. Nathan Lyon was introduced in the 10th over as the run rate stalled. Taj Narayan Chandapal producing some fancy footwork to avoid an embarrassing dismissal to the off-spinner. Kirk McKenzie decided to push the scoring.
Oh, there's some aggression from McKenzie.
But Pat Cummins ended his stay at the crease, gone for 21 after lashing at a wide, bouncing delivery. Chandapal had been offering some resistance, but he couldn't resist a wider one from Mitchell Starc.
Edged and taken, beautifully done.
The left armour then claiming 2 more quick wickets as he passed the 350 test dismissal mark and closed in on Dennis Lilly on the all-time list. The West Indies needed an injection of life and Joshua Da Silva tried to provide it as the tourists found some fight in the late afternoon sun. Tom Wildey, ABC News.
To the weather now. And elevated showers and thunderstorms swept across the state last night with the highest totals in the northeast. El Dorado near Wangaratta recorded 31 millimetres. Today, thunderstorm activity was mostly concentrated around central and eastern districts and the Wimmera. It all cleared by late this afternoon though. Daytime temperatures were slightly below the January average, although Mildura was the hotspot today with a top of 38. In Melbourne, we reached our high of 23.8 degrees around 3:30 this afternoon. Outside now, it's 19. Interstate today, it was wet in Adelaide, sunny in Perth, partly cloudy in Sydney, Brisbane and Hobart, and there were showers with a storm in Darwin. The satellite images showing cloud associated with the monsoon trough persisting over much of the north of the country. Cloud is also streaming from southern WA through the Bight and across to the southeast. A weak trough over Victoria will move to our far east overnight, deepening as it meets a trough in the Tasman Sea before clearing tomorrow. Heavy rain is expected again tomorrow in northern Queensland, and there'll be showers in other parts of Queensland and New South Wales. Showers and storms in the Territory and northern WA. For the capitals, sunny in Perth, partly cloudy in Adelaide and Brisbane, mostly sunny and windy in Sydney. Back home, it'll be dry, warm and mostly sunny across the north of the state, partly cloudy and mild with a chance of light showers over the south. Eastern districts are in for a cloudy morning with scattered showers contracting and clearing in the afternoon. On the bay, 20-knot westerlies will tend southwesterly later on, increasing to 30 knots in the south at night, and waves will be 1.5 metres at most. There is a strong wind warning for most Victorian coastal waters for tomorrow. The public holiday in Melbourne will be partly cloudy with a medium chance of early morning showers. We'll ultimately get to a top of 22, down to 17 tonight. And looking ahead, cloudy and a bit cooler through the weekend, 23 on Saturday and 24 on Sunday. Heading for a sunny 31 degrees on Monday though, that's the hot spot. And that's it for this evening's bulletin from the news team for the moment. Good night.